Time now for Fantasy Football Today for CBS Local Sports. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Adam Azer. We have the starts and sits you need at every position to help you dominate your fantasy leagues for week number 10. Let's get right to the start of the week on CBSSports.com. That's Jared Goff. Love the setup for him against Seattle. They allow an average of 29.2 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Two of the last three quarterbacks against them have gone for 40 fantasy points. Jared Goff has top 5 potential, but we'll just leave him there at number 7. It's a great week for quarterbacks. Some other guys to start with Jared Goff, Drew Lock and Carson Wentz. And hopefully Carson Wentz has another 30-point game against the New York Giants like he had when these two teams met in week number 7. Adam's got the sit quarterbacks. He's sitting Baker Mayfield, Matthew Stafford, Joe Burrow. Adam, Stafford, no Galladay, no start?
That's right, no fun. He's boring, okay? And boring is okay in life. I'm pretty boring, but in fantasy, we want exciting people that are going to have big games. Kenny Galladay doesn't play, and it's not looking like he will. Matthew Stafford is just boring, and the Washington football team gives up the 9th fewest fantasy points to two quarterbacks. This is not as good of a matchup as you might think, so I would start Tua, I would start Locke, I would start Carr all over Matthew Stafford.
Yep, all those guys have more upside than Stafford. Hopefully he does get Kenny Galladay back soon and can have a strong finish to the 2020 campaign, but without Galladay on the field, it's been tough to trust him. Adam, your start running backs, J.D. McKissick, Duke Johnson, and J.K. Dobbins. McKissick, is that just a PPR start, or is that a start across the board?
It is, and Dobbins is only a start if Ingram's out. But as far as McKissick goes, it's really just a PPR start. 6 or more catches, 40 or more receiving yards. That's at least 10 PPR fantasy points without any rushing totals. In 4 of his last 5 games, the Lions give up the 4th most receiving yards per game to running backs, and they're terrible against running backs on the ground, too. So he might be able to get you 30 or 40 rushing yards. You never know. Probably won't score, but I'm thinking about 13 or so PPR fantasy points. I think I'd start him over Darrell Henderson in a full PPR league.
I'm with you there. I think it's a better outlook for McKissick in PPR than Darrell Henderson, who just does not catch the ball. And as we've seen, if he's not scoring touchdowns, it could be a problem for him. He scored in week 5 against Washington, but otherwise, he's got 3 catches or less in his past 3 games, not used in the passing game. We know Malcolm Brown's going to get an opportunity. We know that Cam Akers going to get an opportunity potentially, and he's coming off that quad injury that he suffered against the Dolphins in week 8. It's not a must-sit for Darrell Henderson, but a guy that I would like to avoid if you potentially can. Let's go now to the wide receivers. The guys I'm starting this week, Travis Fulgham, Tim Patrick, and Brandon Ayuk. And when you talk about Fulgham, we got some things in play here. You got Alshon Jeffrey coming back. You got Miles Sanders back. Hopefully better performance from Dallas Goedert. But Fulgham's been so consistent for Carson Wentz, and he had a strong game against the Giants in week 7. You cannot get away from him. He's at least a number 2 wide receiver, still with number 1 upside. So don't fear Travis Fulgham, even though Alshon Jeffrey is coming back for the Eagles this week. Adam, your sit receivers are Darius Slayton, Jacoby Myers, and A.J. Green. And all fantasy managers want to talk about is how great Jacoby Myers was against the Jets. Can he do that against the Ravens on Sunday night?
No, I don't think so. I think you're looking at his first 2 games, or the 2 games before the Jets game, which was, about 5 or 6 catches, 50, 60 yards. You're talking about 10 or 11 PPR fantasy points. And quite frankly, Jamie, I am starting him as a number 3 wide receiver in a full PPR league, because 10, 11 fantasy points is not that bad this week. But in general, if you don't have deep rosters like that, if you don't have to start at least 3 wide receivers, I would say Jacoby Myers is a sit. I see very low upside. Cam Newton, I believe, has thrown 2 touchdown passes this season, so I can't see Jacoby Myers scoring. You're just hoping for about 5 or 6 catches and hopefully 60 yards.
Yep, we'll see how he does potentially with N'Keal Harry coming back with the addition of Isaiah Ford. Those guys are eligible to play this week, so it could be a little bit of a problem for Jacoby Myers. Let's go now to the tight ends and the guys that you like, Adam. Dallas Goedert did not play well in his first game back from the ankle injury the last time we saw him, which was week 8 against the Dallas Cowboys. Eric Ebron, Evan Ingram on this list as well. But let's talk about Goedert. Will he be better coming off a bye for Philadelphia taking on the Giants?
Yeah, I like him less than Ebron, a little bit more than Evan Ingram, but all these guys are basically low-end, top 12 guys. I think Goddard's going to be better because the Giants have struggled recently against tight ends, including Richard Rodgers. Richard Rodgers had a huge game against the New York Giants. He almost scored. If he had scored, it would have been one of the better tight end games that we've seen in a long time from an Eagles tight end, believe it or not. So Dallas Goedert, yeah, I'm starting him up. I think he's going to get probably 7 targets or so, and that could be enough to get you 50 or more yards, and hopefully he's in the end zone against the Giants.
I think he could be a top 5 tight end for Week 10 and maybe a top 5 tight end for the rest of the season, at least until Zach Ertz does return. All right, you see Mark Andrews on this list, Hunter Henry, Jordan Reed as well. Henry's been struggling. Reed, we don't know what to expect, but Mark Andrews has been absolutely awful of late, and now he's taking on a New England defense that has been fantastic against tight ends. You know how great Travis Kelce is. You know how great Darren Waller is. You know when George Kittle's healthy, he's a monster. All 3 of those tight ends against New England this season combined for 10 catches, 133 yards, no touchdowns. That's 22 PPR points combined. Mark Andrews, I hope this is the week that he breaks out of his funk, but it's hard to trust him. So not a guy you have to sit across the board, but I would start Ebron over him. I would start Goddard over him. I'd start Austin Hooper over him. I think all those guys are in a better spot than Mark Andrews. I'm still hopeful for him, but I'm going to try to avoid him in Week 10. Adam, great job. This has been your starts and sits for Fantasy Football Today for CBS Local Sports. Don't forget to check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast. You can find it wherever podcasts are available. The best Fantasy Football Today, the best fantasy football host in the world is on that podcast. You want to check it out to help you win your fantasy leagues in 2020.